Are you going to go to Midwest this year?
I'm planning on it, yeah.
Did you get your doc tickets?
I did. I'm very excited.
Excellent.
How do you resist that? He's what, 91?
Yeah, something like that.
I will be glad to just be making a note by that time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 35. My guest for this episode is Joe Parisi. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening and for your support. If you find value from the show and haven't already done so, please leave me a rating on iTunes. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're really loving what you hear, you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/MarkJConnor. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Mark.
Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And so we were talking a little bit before I started to record that you're my first Florida State graduate, so my first fellow Knoll.
You know, you can say that times two, because I did my master's and doctorate there, so I got a lot of time in Tallahassee, and very thankful for those opportunities.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we touch on Florida State. It's such a tremendous music education school, and I have such great memories of the program there.
It is, and you can trace it back some 50 years that I know with the strength of particular faculty that have been there since that time. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's a remarkable place. So let's introduce yourself. Why don't you tell the listeners who you are and what you're doing right now? Sure.
So I, Joe Parisi, have been in Kansas City at the University of Missouri and in Kansas City since 2002. I finished my doctoral work at Florida State University in music education and conducting, and was very fortunate to get this position and given the opportunity to start a new ensemble. How many times are you given those kind of opportunities? You know, come here, tell us what you want to teach, and start a band. I'm like, okay. The university at that time had one wind ensemble, and they were looking to make it two so that every major had an opportunity to be put in a group. And it has been a dream come true. Had you asked me in 2002, do you think you would have been in Kansas City some 16 years later, I would have said, I wouldn't have thought so. But it's an amazing city, an amazing university, and the arts are alive and kicking here. Love it.
Yeah. So how did you get your start in music? What's your background? I
grew up in upstate New York. And I'm a first generation American. So my parents came over from Italy. And as I was growing up, I was surrounded by music with my mother always singing just in the house and my cousins being musicians. And I just remember that for family gatherings, we'd all get together and people would just play folk music. And so I remember having a harmonica in my hand from day one. So that was kind of the home culture. But then I remember around third grade, it was around Christmas time, and I saw a Christmas program, and there was this guy that had this sequined outfit playing trumpet that sounded amazing. And I said, I have to do that. Well, that was Doc Severinsen. I went, that is amazing. So I remember then that was hooked, and I wanted to play trumpet. And I started in fourth grade in public school.
Where in New York?
Schenectady.
So tell me about how you got started on the trumpet after that. So what was it like going through band? Where was your grade experience? Was it in high school, middle school?
So band in upstate New York was an after-school activity, and it was maybe twice a week, but they would pull you out for group lessons. And I remember that. I guess they would level you based on your ability, and 2 or 3 would be pulled out once a week, and you'd get lessons and then have band either in a late period or after school twice a week. And so that was in fourth grade. But as I look through every pivotal moment, the most important thing that I can recall is that I finally felt like I had a place, and I had teachers who were players, if that makes sense. They were great teachers, but they were also always modeling and playing their instruments. And I would see them in town playing their instruments. And that was always resonant with me.
Yeah, I think you and I are of a like age. And I'm from Connecticut, sort of the same region. And I had a very similar situation. I remember we would be pulled out of class once or twice a week as well. And we'd have lessons. It would be me and my friend playing the trumpet. And then we'd have a rehearsal once a week or twice a week after school. So I think it was a pretty similar system.
Yeah, that's the model, which was different when I finished my music education degree and got my first job, which was in South Georgia, I had no idea that there was everybody in one room learning their instruments. That was a wake up call for me. I was like, oh, okay, everybody's in one room and we're going to learn. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I was in high school, that was starting to go that way. I think. But nowadays, I mean, did you start? What grade did you say you started in, if you don't mind?
4th grade.
Yeah, me too. I don't think kids start that young anymore.
6th grade is the 6th and 7th grade is the norm, and as you and I probably have heard, many programs and districts want to try to cut because they think they save money by starting later, which all the data show that that's not true.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's talk about. Did you have one teacher in high school that you remember most specifically influencing you?
Yeah, I actually had two. Mr. Conrad Couchet, who's from upstate, who I remember going up to him. He was just about to retire. And I went up to him and I said, I want to do what you do. You look like you're having fun. And he did. And so he retired. And then David Norman came in, who's up at, I think, in Bethlehem Schools up in upstate New York. And this gentleman was one of the most gifted musicians I've ever seen in my life. He was not only my band director, he was the jazz band director. He made a deal with me and he said, I'll make you a deal. I'll start a jazz band if you sing in choir. And so I did. And I was in choir with him, music theory with him. He had perfect pitch. He played trombone, he played piano, he played organ, he sang. He was unbelievable. So these two gentlemen during that pivotal time of my life really shaped that musicianship for me.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. And let's take it to the present a little bit. This idea of compromise for teachers and sort of asking students to do one thing in exchange for something else. I know that even as a college professor, I'm giving out free trumpet lessons to a student who's not an instrumental major because I think she should be playing in one of the bands. And so that's sort of my way to leverage what I can offer her. How do you feel about that? And what should teachers be thinking in terms of these deals they make?
Wow, that's a great question. I think for me, when you said that, what resonates with me is the fact that we have to, in high school, our job is to make these people lifelong musicians, somehow invested in the arts the rest of their life. So community bands, or maybe they decide to be on an arts board, or when they're parents, they advocate for their children to be involved because of the experiences they were given. So my hat's off to you for giving this non-major lessons, because music is, she's got the same rights to music as any of us who have decided to take it as a career path. And without those folks on the boards or supporting their children, then we're not going to perpetuate the art form.
Yeah, it's actually, you know, I'm in Missouri as well as you are, and she's actually a choral music ed major, but because of the way Missouri is set up, they don't do instrumental stuff.
Well, yeah, it's some states will certify K-12 music and some will certify specified by track. And in Missouri, you can actually get the certification in the area you're not in by adding 14 credits. That's how it works in our state. So,
oh, wow.
And if she ever decided she wanted to do instrumental, it's a 14 credit add-on.
Oh, I see. I would definitely recommend that for all students. I mean, that just doubles your possibilities.
Absolutely.
And I mean, as music educators, I would like to believe that if a choir needed me to teach them, that I could learn and I could teach myself enough to do that.
Well, that's our goal in any program.
Of course it is. So. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should be music teachers, not, our specific.
You know, you bring up a good point. I lecture on this a lot. And when I'm talking to band directors, I tell them, and our job is not to make them love band. And they look at me and I pause purposely. And I said, our job is to make them love music. And then that means they'll love music the rest of their life. And if band is the way we get them there, then we've done our job.
Right. I agree with that. All right. So I should probably not lecture my listeners about these things. Let's talk about what happened after high school. Let's talk about your college and your graduate studies and what sort of experiences you had there that have made a lasting impression on your career.
Sometimes things happen when you don't expect it. I was going to Eastman School of Music, and then I went and visited Crane in Potsdam, upstate New York, the very first music education program in the country. And my expectations there were no expectations. And I went and visited, and I fell in love with the place. And I went to school there, and little did I know what I was about to be exposed to. just to name, and I mean, my theory teacher was Elliot Del Borgo. My music history professor, who did a class on music history and art, was Robert Washburn. Arthur Frankopole would come in and give us quintets to read that he was arranging for Canadian brass. And Tony Maiello was my conducting teacher. So
wow.
I had no idea until I got there and went, oh my gosh, I hit a home run and had no idea. So that was undergraduate. And my first undergraduate class was with Elliot Del Borgo, and he put a 4-part chorale on the board because I was in the advanced class because of David Norman in my theory class. And he puts a 4-part chorale up and he goes, okay, everyone, there are 9 mistakes on the board. You have 2 minutes to find them all because slow theory is no theory. And I went, oh my gosh, welcome to college.
He's such an important band composer. What else did you take from him, or what did you take from him into your career?
Study, preparation. He was also in an interim. He worked with us in conducting class, and it was amazing because he would write 4-part transposed parts for the class that we could play, and he was just an amazing musician. He was always pushing us, but he was always passionate about the process, always. And he made me work harder than almost all those folks made me work hard. But he really, I find it, sometimes I take it for granted that I'm able to look at a score and go, oh, that's that. And then it becomes part of my rehearsal and how I explain it to the group. I owe that to him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. When you look back at your teachers, and I'm sort of in a little bit of a reflective period because one of my composition teachers passed away this weekend. And so I think about what he taught me and how that influences what I do. And it's a really, I think that's one of the things that is really important about looking back, is this idea of understanding your lineage and what you're passing along.
Yeah. And I think as we get older, we start to see that even clearer because you may not recognize it right away.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about Tony Maiello?
Tony Maiello, this is interesting. When he was at Crane, not only did the wind ensemble, he also did the jazz ensemble. He was the New York State School of Music Association jazz president. And people don't know this about him, but he is a monster keyboard player and has chops galore. And people know him for his conducting, but it all manifests itself from his ability to solfege and play the keyboard. And he'd probably kill me if I told him this, but he's got a great story that when he went to Ithaca, the school, he showed up to go to music school, and I think it was Walter Beeler who said, "What do you play?" He goes, "I play accordion." And Beeler goes, "No, not here. What do you want to do?" He goes, "I think I want to be a band director." He goes, "Well, you're going to have to pick an instrument." And so he picked clarinet, and Beeler gets him one, and he says, "You have to get really good on this instrument so that you stay in this program." And Maiello worked hard, and eventually, by the time he was through the program, he was playing first chair. And so his work ethic is second to none. His passion for excellence in artistry when he was with us, he made you sit up taller and be very proud of how you played. He also stressed the importance of being prepared for rehearsal. I mean, it was unbelievable. So I was the only freshman in the jazz band at that time, and my wife was like one of the only freshmen in the wind ensemble at that time. And we both recount stories of just going into rehearsal, making sure you were ready.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, and that's another thing that resonates throughout all of the interviews I've done, is that successful people expect excellence at every turn.
Well, he definitely made that evident. I can recount a story where we were playing a Charlie Parker tune, one of those super sax transcriptions, and the trumpets just had a lick that was in unison. He'd go down the line, and he said, "Next time I hear that, I want it to be accurate, please." And he didn't call on me for like 3 weeks, and when I went home for Thanksgiving break and was repeatedly practicing this lick, even without the horn in my hand. My father had to slap my hand at church and like, "Stop moving your fingers." And we were in rehearsal after break, and we were playing a completely different piece. And the president of Baldwin Pianos comes into rehearsal, and then he looks over, "Parisi, play that lick." And somehow I put the horn in my mouth, moved my fingers, and it was pristine. Everybody looked down at me. I looked at myself in the horn and went, "Wow." And then there it was. And I realized all that effort was well worth it. I mean, it was an aha moment.
Yeah, sure. So how do we balance that as teachers where we don't become discouraging, but yet we expect that? I mean, what's that is there a secret sauce there?
That's a beautiful question because, as you know, in this day and age, some of the things that our old school directors did, we can't do.
Right.
We just can't. You can't kick a kid out of rehearsal. You can't go down the line and make a kid feel worse about themselves.
Right.
But you can set up opportunities for them to be successful. I try to live by this, and I do the best I can. Praise in public, punitive in private. And so if I feel like someone's not getting something, I am in this day and age, it's so easy to communicate with them via email or a text and say, hey, come to my office. Let me help you through this. And if they're not getting it, I'll give them a couple opportunities to come back. And sometimes I'll even help them find ways to modify what they're doing so they contribute. On the other hand, I also tell them, the expectation is here. Here are ways for you to get there. It's a lot more investment than the belittling in public, but it makes me sleep better at night.
Yeah. No, there's no question about it because I just did listen to 10 sight singers today and some of them were absolutely perfect and some struggled. And so you have to work harder. You can't just reject them out of hand because you don't know what the opportunity that you give them is going to become for them. I mean, I don't think when I went to college that I was going to be a doctorate and a composer who's published. I don't think that was in my path, but I think people were patient with me and gave me an opportunity to grow.
And I think that's important, and also I have something I can hide behind a little bit. I always try to defer to the piece of music. And so if somebody's not getting it, I may say, well, Hindemith has this here and we've got to do justice to meet his expectation. Now, granted, it's on me to pick the literature that fits the group.
Right.
And
that was my next question, but yeah.
I mean, it's my job to pick the literature that's appropriate for the group. And if it lines up, it's one of those great experiences for everyone who felt like you pushed them just an extra bit harder to meet that expectation.
Mm-hmm. So you're at a great school. What happens when you pick a piece that's inappropriate? Maybe it's too hard. How do you handle that?
Well, since 2002, I think there was only one misstep. And I hate that. I mean, that I went, wow, this is just a little much at this point. It was the Morton Gould Symphony for Band, which I absolutely adore, but it is deceptively hard, like most of Gould's stuff. And so what we did is I just delayed that performance by another cycle, and we used it as a process because that's our job. I mean, we got to teach them. I've also been able to transition the structure of a second band mentality. That's something you face at certain institutions. I don't feel we have it here because the level of expectation has become so strong for great performance. We just played Hammersmith at our last concert, but yet we are now on our third concert cycle. And for a second group, that's pretty impressive. Was Hammersmith conference ready? No. Was Hammersmith pretty impressive for them? Yes. Had I had another 2 weeks or 3, it would have been conference ready. So we have to kind of balance, are we working to teach and learn through the process as well and give them a good experience and also set them up to be successful performance majors and teachers? Or are we just going after the product, which you and I both know programs will spend sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks and do one concert? That's a balancing act we all have to face. I have found that by increasing the turnaround time, my students are more hungry to play. And they're getting better.
Yeah. Well,
not sure if I answered your question.
No, I mean, it just makes me think about my own experiences as both as a player and as a conductor when I was a high school teacher and as a composer, to be honest, because often when I'm writing a piece of music, and I tend to write mostly grade 1, 2, 3 stuff, I don't think about the audience in the seats. I think about the audience with the instruments on their face.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, my audience are the directors and the students because the parents and the grandparents who are at the band concert are going to love no matter what they play. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask about that. And so it sounds like you were thinking about your audience as being your students.
You're absolutely correct. And when you're playing a concert at home, as I call it, I tell the kids, I said, look, the people in that audience are going to love you no matter what, but you're going to know what you were able to accomplish. If you were to say, okay, now you got accepted to CBDNA as we did a few years ago, and you're going to that conference, then that continuum is a little different. But but it's only because you may live with a piece a little bit longer or introduce it early in the fall and bring it back in the spring. Especially if you collaborate with a composer and you're premiering something new, that's a great opportunity. So it's a balancing act of, just like anything, you plan and you work backwards to say, all right, we have X amount of rehearsals. This is our most difficult piece. We'll give it this much time, and we'll trust that everybody's going to do their best effort to play beautifully.
Yeah. No, I just, this thought in my head about this. And, I was thinking, well, gee, as a professional, you have to worry about the audience. But even at that point, there's always going to be people who love you and people who don't like you. And you just have to believe in what you're doing.
And that's something in music we all have to come to grips with. Music is a very jealous companion.
It sure is.
It will tell you when you've done something, even if you think you've done enough time on it, it'll probably say, sorry, that wasn't enough. Or if you've taken time off and come back, it may say, you know what? Sure, I missed you. Where were you? And we have to just be determined to recreate those moments that keep us coming back.
Yeah, that's an amazing sentiment. I love that saying.
I think that came from Gary Green at Miami. I heard him say it once, and I went, that's a brilliant thought. He says music is a jealous lover. Uh-huh. And it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a terrific saying. I love that sentiment because it's the kind of saying where, the good sayings are the ones where they make you reflect and they make you kind of go through your own mental catalog. Interesting.
Well, you're a trumpet player, right? As well.
I am indeed.
And that instrument can tell you some days that things didn't quite go as well. And you kind of, I don't golf, but I imagine it's kind of like, I've golfed, and there's one of those moments where you hit the ball and it just feels right.
Yep.
And that's what makes you come back. You're like, I'm going to go do that again. And then you might try 13 swings and get one that feels good, but you'll come back because you want to feel that again. And I think that's our job as teachers, is to increase the number of moments where our students go, man, that was well worth it.
Yeah. I do golf. And when I was a high school teacher, I was single and had no kids and I had a lot of time. And so in the band off season, or in the season when we weren't doing a lot of festival stuff after school and extracurricular, I took golf lessons for a couple of years, and I got pretty close to the pro who was teaching. And, I would hit good shots from time to time, but I went out golfing with him. He took me to a Pro-Am tournament once. Mm-hmm. And this is one of my great memories because it was such an analogous experience to music. Playing with him, I would occasionally hit a good shot, but every shot he hit was good. And his consistency was incredible. It's not that he was perfect, but it was so consistently good at a level. And that's, I think, what we have to realize as music professionals, is that we're not going to be perfect, but it's that consistency.
What a great analogy. I've had the good fortune to work with some of the best in the brass world, and you watch them perform. And what I notice is that there's, this is, for example, in Summit Brass, it's a 1 week go out and conduct, and you probably have 3 services on any particular piece and then the performance. And what I notice is they come in, and the first time through, they're making changes, and the second time through, it's already to a level that most people feel that's great. And by the third time through, they've all done what they need to do to take care of business, so that by the time we're on stage, everyone's trusting one another to take care of their own responsibilities to get through the process and contribute to the collaborative effort. And it's amazing when you see that at that level.
Yeah, no question. As a composer, I've been fortunate to work with some people like that too. I wrote a trumpet duet, and I had Karen Bliznick and Jeff Strong from the St. Louis Symphony read it.
Yeah.
They took it so seriously. It was just at a reading thing, but they took it so seriously and gave it so much professional effort, and it was just perfect. That was awe-inspiring to watch that.
I think that's a testament to the majority of people seeing a composer writing something and I hope that's how I feel. If somebody has invested their time to create something and we can give that an opportunity for it to breathe life, I don't think there's anything more exciting than that.
Well, I appreciate that as a composer. I'll speak for all of my brethren because, there's a mutual respect, I think, between conductors, composers, and performers.
It's some of my favorite work. I think I was kind of trying to count it up. At UMKC, between my colleague and I, since 2003, I think we've commissioned and or premiered over 50 works.
Wow.
Well, keep in mind, I'm at a university that has a renowned composition faculty.
Yes, you did. Yes, true.
and then they're asking their students to write for our medium. I know that, I mean, if you just say that I do usually 1 to 2 pieces a year, and I've been here 16, and my colleague does the same. Sometimes my last year I did 3 pieces that were all commissioned and new. So I love that energy because I've got kids hungry to write for us, and they're getting great tutelage, and their works aren't getting to me until like every composition faculty member has looked at them.
How about from outside? Do you have any notable stories of composers that have come in from the outside that you've brought in for commissions or consortiums?
Oh, absolutely. We have a bar laureate program here, and since I've been here, we've had Stephen Stuckey, and we've had John Corigliano, and most recently, our current bar laureate is Jennifer Higdon. And you want to talk about a beautiful energy? Mm-hmm. She is all of that. She comes from a band background. She was inspired by band teachers. She was a flute player, and she is so gracious with our students. As a matter of fact, she's here in December, and she asked to work with the middle school group. So we're going to bring a middle school group in for our December concert. They're going to do Rhythm Stand by her, and we're going to do a side-by-side concert with our students, the middle school kids, and Jennifer.
That's really cool. What kind of value does that bring to the students to have people from outside or composers coming through?
It gives them a bit of a reality check that, well, I mean, because as you and I know, personalities are different. And in Jennifer's case, they were just excited to have her in the environment and collaborating with them. And I think that made them optimistic to the future of the medium and of I mean, my gosh, female composers.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Hilary Hahn asked her to write a violin concerto for her, but yet here she is with us being just as giving and humble. So I think our students see the value. I know when Corigliano came in and he did his Circus Maximus, what great experiences for our students to do something like that. So I remember at FSU, we had Gunther Schuller get an honorary doctorate. I'll never forget that experience. We played his Symphony for Brass and Percussion. And the music world is a small unit, as you know, like maybe one generation removed, if that. And here I am conducting Summit Brass, and what was the first thing I conducted with them? The Symphony for Brass and Percussion. And as I was doing my score study, I reached out to Gunther Schuller, and he was kind enough to respond and talk to me for about 30 minutes about the piece and some questions I had. Full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the benefit of going to a school like UMKC or FSU or Arizona State or Indiana or any number of places I could name so no one gets offended by me.
Oh, you did well.
Yeah, but well, I'm trying to think of where people on the show have come from. But you want to talk a little bit more about the FSU experience?
Well, you know, I had 2 experiences there that fed one another. So, you know, the Opus 1 experience was very green undergrad coming out, playing trumpet, and just excited about playing trumpet, and got the assistantship to teach down there and study with Brian Goff at the time. And so, again, it was one of those things. It was between Eastman, I'd gotten in, and Manhattan and Florida State. And most people would think, well, why didn't you pick one of the other names over Florida State? But when I visited, it just felt right. And again, if you recall from the beginning, my parents were, I'm first generation. So my parents, both between my mom and dad, you had a 3rd grade education and a 5th grade education, and they were just manual labor folks. We didn't have a lot of money. And Eastman, even with the assistantship, was quite expensive. And Florida State was free by the time I was done, you know, with what I got. So, and it was a lot warmer than upstate New York. So I was like, oh, okay, this is a winning situation. So when I went down there, I had the great opportunity to play and learn from Jim Croft, who later became my conducting teacher, and from people like Clifford Matson in the education area. I didn't know who he was. And somebody said, you should take a class from him. I know you're in performance, but you should take a class from him. And I did. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced anybody of this intellect.
Yeah, he is monumentally. Yeah, I can't describe it.
Nobody can. But the experiences and the life lessons I've learned from him from that time, and then when they called me about 9 years later to say, hey, do you want to come back and get your doctorate? So Opus 1 was as a trumpet performance major, but knowing that I wanted to teach. Then Opus 2 is 8 years later. when I got a phone call from Cliff Madsen and from Jim Cross saying, "Do you want to come back to school for your doctorate?" And I said, I'm absolutely ready. It was amazing to have those individuals who had been there to see me as a trumpet performance major, but had obviously kept track of what I was doing as a teacher, not too far from them because I was in South Georgia, and then reaching out to ask me to come back. That was a monumental moment in my life.
Yeah, my experience at FSU was pretty special. I wish I was kind of at a time, though, where I was a little bit in transition, and I wish I had been a little bit more involved with the band. I was sort of being pulled the other direction because my wife's cellist from FSU. And so I was kind of hanging out with the string players, the chamber musicians, and kind of doing the composition thing that way. And I never really got to know many people other than Dr. Croft and Dr. Madsen.
I got the TA and my doctorate with Pat Dunnigan, who was recently CBDNA president. And being in that class, I learned a lot about just the fundamentals of conducting. I mean, he did such a beautiful job of structuring that. I have great memories of that school, and I feel like I wouldn't have been anywhere near where I am today if it wasn't for everybody in that place investing in their students.
Yeah, I should not make the podcast, old folks at home week, but I agree with you, and I have the same warm feelings about it.
Well, here's to the Seminoles.
Hopefully they'll be better next year.
I know. Not for football right now.
Basketball season's just around the corner.
Here we go.
Yep. All right.
Sure.
In a more specific way?
Yeah, we have two bands, and my colleague Steve Davis and I have been working together for over 10 years now. And I think I know what we've developed here has gotten the attention of people throughout the country. I'm really proud of it, and we work so well together. And what's most exciting is that you have Steve's group, which is primarily composed of graduate students. Maybe there are about 8 or 9 undergraduates. And that group is just a professional wind ensemble. They sound amazing. They're able to play anything you put in front of them. And then you have that's called the Wind Symphony. And then we have the Wind Ensemble, which I was very fortunate to start in 2002. And that group has gotten to a point now where it's by no question one of the best in the region. And I'm really proud of what they've been able to do to perform at state conventions and at the regional CBDNA. And one thing we're both pretty passionate about is commissioning new works. And I try to do at least 2 a year. And I will have had this year, probably by the time we're done, I think we'll have 3 in the wind ensemble. I know Steve recently just commissioned the Concerto for Wind Orchestra by Joe Long. And that was premiered at CBDNA that we just hosted. I think you knew that, right? We just had the College Band Directors National Association Conference here last year. It was a huge success. We got to do it in Kaufman Performance Hall, which was the same architect who built the hall in Tokyo and LA. And it was just an unbelievable event for us to host. And I can't think of a better place than Kansas City to have that happen. So I think our wind bands are poised on a national stage just for the fact that we've both been here. There's a sense of longevity and commitment to it. And not to dismiss the fact that we have world-class composition faculty who are writing for us and encouraging their students to write for us. I mean, it's really an exciting time to be here.
That's cool. Yeah, UMKC is a great school. All right, Joe. So one of the things I've been thinking about is the idea that you brought up early on, and we talked about it with your beginning as a musician, and then it sort of came up again as we talked about FSU, and now you're talking about UMKC, but the sense of belonging that being a musician provides or being in band provides.
Wow. I don't, here you take a guy like myself who first language was Italian, but luckily music has no language as far as when we hear it. And then I'm part of a group at school, and I had teachers who saw that and were willing to shepherd me through that. It is amazing to see that that's been my trajectory my entire life. Even now, I feel like the students I have help validate that I'm doing what I love to do more than anything else. I mean, there's nothing more that feeds the soul than what we get to do. And when you put it in a sense of the historical wind band, it really is a beautiful and collaborative energy, because what I get to do is in a professional essence work with great students that want to perpetuate the art form and or be part of the artistic society. But then you think about, I also get to do community music where there's people that are just engineers, teachers at universities, housewives, because I get to do that once a week as well. And they are just so excited to make music. And it's all because of that unifying source of creating music together in a band. I mean, I can think back to fourth grade to now, and it doesn't feel any different.
Yeah, I know. We talk about all the intrinsic benefits and the extrinsic benefits of music and how it makes our test scores go up. And one of the things that I've talked about with a lot of my guests is that music by itself has value. I mean, music itself is important. But I do want to talk about that idea of, for young people especially, when I was a kid, that sense of belonging was really important.
Well, the sense of belonging is critical. And again, I just did a study on Italian bands and the culture of the Italian bands in Italy with my dear friend, Deb Confredo, who teaches at Temple University, fellow Italian. And, the unique issue in a country like Italy versus the U.S. is bands are not part of a structured activity in school. It is a community-based function where you're brought through it as either a part of your family, you were in the town, your grandparents played in a band. It's a tradition that you are brought up in, but not as part of a public education or a school education. Whereas in this country, we're brought through this structured environment. You start in this grade and you have this time to do these classes, and here's when you have band. And one thing we were trying to see is if there were similarities, and there certainly were. But one of the things that still concerns me in our country is how are we getting those people that do not go into music for a livelihood to keep making music the rest of their lives? And how do we not burn them out and make them have that sense of belonging you had in your band director's room when they're 50 or 60?
Right.
That's my challenge to our profession.
Yeah. You know what? I go play in a community band in my local town here every Tuesday night.
That's what I mean. It's therapeutic. It promotes growth and collaboration, and it contributes to the greater good of who we are. And that's something I always have to remember. And I mean, I can obviously wear my artistic hat and sit down and premiere a new work for a discriminating audience, but we have to also remember that 85% of the people to 90% of the people listening to us just want to enjoy the music or just be part of this social group that works together to create music. We have to remember that.
Right. And so you mentioned that you're trying to figure out how. Do you have any insights in that? Do you have any thoughts about how we do this, how we foster this sense of belonging?
Well, one of the other hats I wear is brass banding, right? I've been doing this for years.
Yeah, this is my next topic, but let's just link right in, segue right there.
I think they've got it figured out. I mean, you look at the history of brass banding, and it was all to build community. But then as an outgrowth, because community wanted excellence, they start adding competition and adjudication and like upping the bar. And the expectation gets to the point where you have, and I'm air quoting this word, amateur musicians playing at a level that is unbelievable. And when you see little kids sitting next to adults sharing in that investment, I feel that brass banding has grown in this country. I mean, I know in Kansas City, since I got here, we started the brass band in 2002, and we now have Fountain City Brass Band, and we have 5 youth bands.
Wow.
I know. So, and I can tell you that as an offshoot of Fountain City Brass Band, I know of 4 direct brass bands that have grown from members who have moved and now are starting their own brass bands.
Yeah, and so what I was going to ask next is as you just mentioned, you're the director of the Fountain City Brass Band. I know a lot of people who've played in that group with you.
Mm-hmm.
Even here in St. Louis, there's some people who've played with you.
Mm-hmm.
And the sense of community, and now it's based on the British Brass Band. And I want to talk about that idea of competition, but I want to just ask you quickly that sort of like the history of that, the Fountain City.
Fountain City in 2002 was started by a collective group of folks led by Lee Harrelson, who's the artistic director, and he's also the chair of music up at Missouri Western. Fabulous euphonium player. So he saw he had never seen a brass band, and he was at an ITEC conference in Europe. He heard one. He went, "Oh my gosh, I have to do that." So he basically took every energy he had and spent his own money and bought pieces and put a group together at UMKC in 2002. And it was kind of a group of local musicians and college professors from KU and from Central Missouri and Washburn. And we didn't even have the right instruments. We didn't have tenor horns. We had French horns, and we didn't have cornets. And I'm playing on a Bundy cornet that had a scale that sounded like some kind of Indian instrument because it wasn't in tune at all, like a 24-note scale. And we hammered away playing some music, and everybody went, "Wow, this is fun." And then it kept moving and moving. And then I think in 2003 or 4, they started going to competitions. I had stepped away a little bit to have my daughter at that point. And then I went back in 2006 to guest conduct, and then I started conducting, and it was like, it just was something that was amazing. Now, brass banding's been kind of part of my life in an odd way for a long time. I student taught in England while I was at Crane at Potsdam.
Really?
Yes. And when I student taught, one of my friends had done the same program the year before I did it. He said, "You need to play in the brass band." I'm like, "In a what?" He goes, "You need to play in the brass band there. Dennis Wick is conducting it." Dennis Wick, the mute guy, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, okay. So I show up at this rehearsal, and I'm playing they hand me a music part that has this word "Repiano" on it. I'm like, I speak Italian, but I don't know what this word means. And the listeners that don't know what that is, that's the single voice in the brass band in the back row of a cornet section that kind of bobs and weaves between the first cornets, the E-flat cornet, the tenor horns, the flugelhorn. And so it's kind of like a quarterback position. You get to do a lot of different things. So I was like, okay, this is fun. This is amazing. And then I went to Bainbridge, Georgia when I got my first job. And guess what Bainbridge, Georgia had? A British-style brass band. And I played in that. And then I moved to Kansas City, and what are they starting? A brass band. So there's a little bit of history.
It's cool. You guys were great at Midwest last year.
Oh, thank you. That was a really fun performance, and it was nice to do it on a stage like that. It really was.
It was a great show. Are you fired up for Battle Creek?
I am, and I know they're really early on Wednesday, so I hope people go.
They're
hear
like
them.
The first concert.
I know. I hope they go hear them.
There's some hard charging dudes in that group, man.
I got to tell you what I'm excited about is we're 17 days away from our trip to the UK. We're heading to Brass at Concert, which is the largest entertainment competition in brass banding world, and this is the best lineup they've ever had. And so we head out of the country on the 17th. We will compete that weekend, and then we go to Scotland the following weekend to compete in the Scottish Open brass band competition that we won in 2009. So this is a really exciting semester for Fountain City. Really exciting. I
actually wanted to ask you about competition, and because that's a really controversial issue in the band world. Graded competitions. But you mentioned it with the brass band because graded competitions do bring a band together. They do foster that community.
Well, I'll tell you. Okay, well, so if you want to go there, competition for our world and band world is synonymous with what? Marching band.
Yeah, for the most part.
Right? There are a couple of sit-down graded festivals where you go to an amusement park and you're the top band for the day. But mostly it's in what I call that athletic event, marching band. It is an athletic event. Yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, in the other domains for brass band, it is, when you think about this, nobody does that in this country, but there are places that some of the competitions, everybody plays the same piece. And you are compared to one another.
Those are the test pieces, right?
And that's man, holy. I mean, that's some heavy duty, like, wow. First of all, I don't know if I want to be a judge on one of those competitions. I don't know if I could listen to something that many times. But as a conductor, once you get beyond teaching and working a group to the point where everybody's in agreement with certain fundamental structural things, in time, in tune, etc., then you got to find, how do you breathe life to this piece so that your interpretation stands above the rest? And that will get a group of highly motivated individuals to work hard. And as a result, everybody gets better by the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think competition, so long as it doesn't consume the band and the director, is pretty healthy.
When you walk into a room and all you see is trophies, and here's my litmus test, okay? Here's my litmus test. I will ask a kid about their program. And if I ask what their favorite part of it was, and they go back to, we won, or our trophy, or when we won this competition, and then I will quickly ask them, what was your favorite piece?
Yeah.
And, you know, if you ask Fountain City brass band members anything about competition, many of them won't remember how many they've won. But I know that people will say, oh, the year we did this piece, that was amazing. And I'll tell you, there are a couple of years that they didn't place first that people remember as their best performance.
Yeah. No, Joe, when I look back, if you asked me what was the greatest moment of high school, it would be playing Holst's First Suite and Irish Tune on the same concert my senior year.
There you go.
And I don't remember where we placed in any of the competitions we did, and we did a lot of them.
Right.
Man, that concert forever to me was the perfect program. We also did Alfred's Mad Major as our march.
Right.
It was wonderful.
You probably were getting ready for somebody to assess the playing of the group.
It's true. We were, and we went to lots of competitions, and we played that program at 4 or 5 graded festivals in California.
Right. And, you know, I will admit we've gone to some competitions, and the piece they've chosen is terrible.
Right.
And that's even a harder challenge. Like, oh my gosh, we've got to spend a month on this piece, and we've got to try to make it sound good. And what do you do? How
do you deal with that as a judge?
I hate it because it becomes one of those tick marks. Oh, they missed this, they missed that, that's out of tune. And I've literally had judges on our tapes say, oh, unfortunate E flat stop, you missed that one. I'm like, oh God, we've gotten to this point, you know? But when it's an artistic piece of music and people can really shape it, that's pretty amazing. You know, the Scottish Open this year is an open contest, so there's no set piece, but it's you pick a work of Peter Graham's.
Uh-huh.
So he's a fabulous composer and has a great catalog of work people can pick. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. But then how do you weigh a piece that is more technically demanding than one that's less, and one that's played more beautifully because of lyricism? It's going to just have to be who presents their best work on that day on a piece of music they completely sell.
So what hard-earned lessons about being a conductor or a teacher can you pass along? At least the lessons that you can distill.
You know, I get to wear different hats. So when I think about it, I think as conductors or musicians or an audience member or sitting on a panel or of a jury, we got to realize that we're all in it for the creative and that collective artistic endeavor. And it's really important to remember that we have to share the investment. Those days of the tyrant in front of the group, that's I don't believe that's how we function anymore. And I don't see many of those people functioning anymore. We also have to realize that wearing your conductor hat, not everybody has positive comments to say about conductors. So you've got to not take it personally. You can't always tell, like, I think I know this because I still am an active performer, but sometimes an ensemble member's body language isn't necessarily what they think of your work. And I don't know. I try to explain that to my students, and Ben Zander has a beautiful story in his Art of Possibility about his impression of a particular person's body language in rehearsal and how he thought they were not invested. And then he actually reached out to this person who said, actually, working with you on that particular piece was one of the best experiences I've had. So we've got to make sure we represent the music the best we can, treat people with respect, and then hope in turn you've done them and the music and yourself justice. I mean, we've got to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's good advice. Good thoughts. Yeah, so what's that book, Ben Zander, The Art of Possibility?
Yeah.
I'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah, don't take it personally. Don't take everything personally. And it's not just about gesture. I get so caught up on people with conducting. They're worried about gesture. It's not everybody sees the hours of thought and energy we put into studying a piece and then just like deciding the hierarchy of importance. You know, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. We just have to be good stewards of hoping to share these opportunities.
Yeah. What do you think are the challenges that are facing us as music educators, band directors, as we move forward into the 21st century?
I think we're in a society of immediacy. People are expecting things immediately and also somehow have a reward that's immediate. And an investment in music sometimes is not immediate. However, I think we as teachers can provide and have to try to make sure we provide those opportunities in each and every rehearsal by just stopping and going, that was it. Listen to this. Wow. I don't know about you, but a lot of times I've seen people work through a rehearsal continuum and the group never has an opportunity to feel the gestalt. Like, what does this whole thing feel like? And I get it. Sometimes it's hard to dissect a very difficult piece. But if that's what we're doing every rehearsal, how can someone walk out feeling rewarded? So that's one thing. I mean, we have such wonderful opportunities in music making that we need to make sure we approach it like as fresh and new eyes every day and help students become better musicians so that what have they done today in class and rehearsal, how can we get them to think about implementing that tomorrow to become better musicians? It's critical. And also, and this is a charge on my other side, not everybody's going to be an ensemble musician. There are some kids in our programs that maybe deserve opportunities to enjoy music that are going to be good at sitting at a computer and using GarageBand. And how do we reach out to them? That's a challenge I haven't answered yet, but that's something that I always think about.
It's one of our more urgent challenges, I think.
I absolutely think it is, because I have heard some extremely creative people write something, yet they couldn't put it down on paper for you. But yet when I listen to it, I believe it's exceptionally creative and remarkable. And so do we belittle them and tell them, well, because you didn't study this Walter Piston book, this is not valid? That's a question for the future of our world to consider as we move forward.
Well, a lot of it has to do with what role does a traditional education play in the future as we move forward?
How do we become valid to everyone?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to speak about another composer, and certainly not one of his stature, but John Mackey began with a computer.
I know. And, I got to hand it to our program. Here, we're accepting kids that have that creative flow, and our faculty are shepherding them through. And our kids are getting jobs writing film scores. And I mean, and at first everybody was very oh, but that's not the traditional canon. Okay.
Right.
I have to trust that my colleagues know what they're doing, and I have seen it, and I'm pushing myself to try to find ways to incorporate people that have a gift that may not be able to present it the same way I do, but it doesn't mean it's less valid.
Right. So, Joe, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
It's just funny because I've heard a couple of your shows and I went, wow, I'm going to sound like everybody else, but I agree. Be patient. You've got to just be patient and ask questions, and don't be afraid to be wrong. Yeah,
the willingness to be wrong is something that comes up a lot. I think when
vulnerability.
And vulnerability is something that I deal with a lot on the show because it's something that I deal with as myself. I'll freely admit that my imposter syndrome some days is awful.
That's it. I was talking to a grad student about that yesterday. They came in and their first rehearsal, they're brand new in the graduate program and they want to impress teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And they got done and I said, so here's some things we got to work on. And I gave 3 specific behaviors. And I saw their eyes get a little bit watery, and the next day we had a debrief, and I said, you know what, you're here because we trust that you're going to be fabulous. But the trust and the vulnerability you offer us will only allow you and us to grow together. And it gave me a hug on the way out, felt good about it, and said, just trust that our job is to make you absolutely amazing by the time you're out of here. And if you think you'll have learned it all by then you need to write a book.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it. I think people who are making progress do have to be vulnerable. If you think you have all the answers, you're probably not growing.
Also put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard thing for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, and I'm really proud of the young people. Like I'm talking about undergrads who, when they're in a class and the teacher says, so who wants to get up and try this? And they jump up and do it. That would have not been me.
Yeah.
Because I was afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah. I have a lot of students like that.
Yeah. I've tried to change that.
Sometimes it's maturity. Sometimes it's so baked in, it's hard to. I don't know. Yeah. There's a Carol Dweck book about the growth versus fixed mindset.
I love that mindset book. She's great.
Yep.
You can link to that too. I think that's a fabulous book.
I will. All right, Joe. So I used to ask what everyone's favorite work was, and I got a lot of Lincolnshire Posy. So now I ask, hypothetically, you have the choice of the last piece you'll ever conduct.
Wind band or orchestra?
You could do both.
Orchestra would be Brahms, any of it.
Okay.
Wind band, and I bet you've had other people, I think you've had other people say this, but there's no question in my mind it'd be the Hindeman Symphony.
Yeah, that's a popular one.
Well, there's no question. The neoclassic structure, the harmonic language, the ability to write melodic components, even though it may not be as apparently diatonic to some people. I think it's remarkable. I just love it.
Yeah, it's a great work. No question.
Yeah. Yep.
Brahms and Hindemith.
Yeah. I guess oh, what's that say about an Italian? There you go.
And no Verdi.
You know what? Had you asked me the piece that changed my life, it would have been the Verdi Ave Maria from the Four Sacred Pieces.
Oh, wow.
And it was my high school band director that told me to sing in choir. Remember you asked about him, and I remember being in my basement putting on the Ave Maria because it's based on a scale structure he came up with. And I was taking theory class, and he made theory. This is my teacher. He made theory in this piece real, where I was sitting there and I had an aha moment. And then I asked him, could we sing it? Which is a lot for a high school group to do. But we did, and I will never forget it.
Yeah, I love Verdi. That guy could spin a melody like nobody.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. All right. So knowing that this episode is going to be released on November 13th, 2017, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Well, we will be heading to the UK on the 17th. So it's called Brass in Concert, and I think it will be live streamed. And I'd love for anybody that's out there that wants to see what this is all about to check it out. I'm not sure if we can find a link to it, but if we look up Brass in Concert, could be a good opportunity for that.
Sure.
So that's probably the most exciting thing coming up for me right now.
Cool. All right, Joe, this has been terrific. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I sent you a link to a webpage. I put it on that online questionnaire, so they can go to that, or they can look me up through UMKC or Fountain City Brass Band.
Perfect. I will link both of those. Joe, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. This has been great. You got me to think a lot.
I mean, you certainly get me to think a lot too. And I worked with a former student of yours, and I see why she has such great admiration for you.
Thanks, Mark.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
All right. Be well.